we're going to get started. This panel session started off last year with a collaborative project. I'm going to overview it very quickly. It's downloadable off our website. If you just put in the 5 characters, STEM with the number 4, you'll be able to download that paper. It's very easy. And there are also, I believe, copies here today on your chairs, correct? STEM to the 4th power, the power of collaboration for change. I'm going to introduce the panelists in just a moment. I'm going to give this overview as we start. Peter, can you hear us online?
I can hear you very well, thank you.
All right, sounds good. You actually sound better than you look, I'm sure. Anyway, I have to. So, initiate excellence through best practice. The panelists are Troy Blumier, who is our ITEEA, Council for Supervision and Leadership President. We have David Barnes, who's the National Council of Teacher of Mathematics Associate Director for Research, Learning, and Development. Cindy Hasselbring was unable to attend. She's the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Associate Director for STEM Education due to the COVID-19 issues. We have Greg Pearson from the National Academy of Engineering as a scholar and K12 Education representative and public understanding of engineering, plus he's been with our field for about 3 decades now, at least, and doing really well. Really well with it. We have Peter McLaren online. He's the Executive Director of NextGen LLC, and Dr. Philip Reed, who is the President-elect of ITEEA and also a professor at Old Dominion University. And going to you. And myself, Steve Barbato, Executive Director and CEO of ITEEA, and I'll be the moderator for this session. So let's quickly look at STEM to the 4th power, the power of collaboration for change. So online with Peter McLaren zooming in, and myself, we were, along with the Council for State Supervisors for the Mathematics Group, that's ASSM, right, David?
Correct.
And then also the Council for State Science Supervisors, CS-Cubed, ITEA, and I'll put up all the acronyms here. Advanced CTE, that's the supervision group of ACTE, and NextGen LLC, that's Peter, and also the Council of Chief State School Officers, that's the State Superintendent's Group. We're challenged by and charged from Texas Instruments and funded to put together a collaborative paper that defined what are and what is STEM education today in the pre-K12 sector, as well as what are some policies and items and issues that need to be addressed moving forward. So as we did that, we put together and identified the lack of STEM preparedness as a common theme throughout. Many STEM careers have not yet been envisioned, and there's a lack of equity. I'm sure from the people sitting in this room, that's nothing new to you. So now, where did we go with this? Well, we went to principle number 1, and it's this. I'm going to say some words that are not in that paper to try to give you a mind's eye view of where I'm going with this. When you talk about the first principle, it's really addressing teaching in silos. And that's okay. It is okay to teach individual content skills assessments that need to be learned in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That content, those skills are paramount, and they become a foundational component. We have to recognize it, appreciate them, and value them. And that can happen from pre-K all the way up through grade 12 in each of those disciplines. Principle number 2, STEM education should provide logical and authentic connections between and across the individual STEM disciplines. This is, in my opinion, the game changer for teaching about STEM in schools. It's actually taking that individual content now and raising that level of consciousness and intentionally integrating the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We use an integrative STEM education approach, focusing and really concentrating on the technology and engineering as an engagement point, but immediately bringing in the appropriate math and science that needs to be taught with that and through that. So it's an integrative STEM education approach, or integrated STEM education approach. And then we have, as a third part, careers. It is very difficult to not underplay the importance of careers and how we teach them. And it's not just, when I say underplay, it's not just teaching about careers within a lesson or what careers are available. It's actually teaching about careers that students can engage and vision themselves in those careers. But more importantly, realize that they can create new careers of their own as they move forward. And it's actually going to be an expectation that they're able to do as they move forward. It comes back to an old adage in education. You can't teach them everything they're going to encounter when they go to apply it, and you're not going to be by their side. They actually have to be taught in a way that they can learn and apply it better than you can teach it. That's really important, and that holds true with the careers piece. It's the most challenging of all this, in my opinion. So, why does it matter? We need student engagement. It needs to be relative. There need to be funding opportunities out there from the policy side. That's the reality of it. We need to make sure that we ensure high-quality STEM learning, increase access and equity for all students, and provide professional learning opportunities for teachers at all levels. So, as I move forward with that, I'm going to back off of that and go back to the beginning slide. And we'll pull up. We don't have it on this machine. I forgot one document, so I'll be able to do it because I remember things. So we'll go from there. Well, better yet, I know what happened last week. Let me pull up.
If that's my laptop, he's not going to find what he wants.
It's his.
Oh, good.
Now I have my cheat sheet there, so that's really good. So the idea behind this best practices session with the panel is for me to introduce the panelists as I did before, and then have each of them speak to the STEM4 collaborative process and best practice in their minds, and a little bit about them as they're going through it. So they have 3 to 4 minutes each, then we're going to do that, and then Troy is going to share 3 different best practices, one at the elementary, one at the middle school, one at the high school, based on some PDFs that we have here to share. Some of the schools were going to be here, but because of issues, I don't think they are. Is that correct, Troy? So we don't have them here, but we do have their best practice, and we'll be sharing that. The panelists will be able to comment on that, and you'll be able to ask questions and comment as well. So we're going to start off on the panelists with Troy Bloom. This is where you introduce yourself, CSL, and that process.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Troy Blunier, President for the CSL, the Council for Supervision and Leadership here at ITEEA. My job essentially is to represent our members, those that are involved in supervision and leadership across all the members for ITEEA, and how we can provide professional development for you, our members, and help you essentially in your day-to-day walk, your day-to-day work life.
Okay. Greg?
We're just introducing
Yeah, we're just introducing ourselves, and a little bit about the STEM4 and how it connects. No, the question. This is where you do the question. Well, the CSL is there. The CSL is there.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Okay.
Craig thought it was going to be a level playing field. It's not a level playing field. Number 2,
It's rigged,
so
yeah.
because he's not here, and because I wasn't looking at his face on the screen, who did I forget? I forgot Peter, so I apologize, Peter. But we will make sure we have you up here. Gregory, you're up.
Okay, I'm Greg Pearson. Formerly at the National Academy of Engineering, I am officially retired, but continue to be employed nominally to help on various things related to K12 engineering, public understanding of engineering principally. And that has been what I have been involved in at the NAE for a number of years, as was pointed out. The academies, for those of you who don't know, are not part of the federal government. They're a nonprofit organization that has a role in advising the nation on matters of science and engineering and health as they intersect with public policy. And our work frequently results in reports that have recommendations for various actors, including the government, universities, professional associations like ITEEA, and so on. I did read the paper, Steve, and I thought it was entirely reasonable. I had no argument with any of the conclusions. The principles all sound good as well. I will share in a somewhat, in terms of the work that we've done at the academies that may be seen as perhaps a little bit negative given the optimistic view of that paper. I don't believe still that there is really agreement on what STEM means within the education community. And so that's important to at least acknowledge as we're having conversations with other groups within the broad confines of science, technology, engineering, and math. People, teachers, supervisors, curriculum developers, and the public, of course, all come at this acronym somewhat differently. So it's important to keep that in mind. We've done some work at the academies to try to tease apart how STEM, what research suggests about truly integrated STEM education, and that is obviously the intent of the paper that Steve and hopefully you have read that ITEEA prepared. Again, just pointing out that not everyone necessarily, even the organizations that were represented in that effort necessarily would agree on the emphasis, let's just say, within the four letters. Also, again, from an academy's point of view, where we try to look at the extent research and learning in the cognitive sciences. We have recently just published a report that looks at the teacher workforce in K12 for teaching engineering, and both trying to understand what it is at the moment, but also trying to understand how to prepare teachers to teach about engineering in the future, which is clearly an integrated form of teaching. And there's just not a lot of research about how best to prepare teachers to teach in an integrated fashion. It doesn't mean it's not happening, and I'm looking forward to hearing Troy's examples. But in terms of what the research community in education would call best practices, we're a long way from understanding what such practices would be. And then the last thing I'll say is the next generation science standards, which I hope that most of you are at least vaguely aware of, I believe present a great opportunity for integrated teaching and learning, particularly between engineering and science. However, it appears now 4 years out from their publication. Actually, no, that's not right. It's 7 years. Wow, 7 years since they were published. That efforts to implement more integrated forms of science teaching across the states is really not happening. So this is an opportunity for ITEEA and those who are concerned about engineering and technology education to try to work with your science counterparts to take advantage of these new standards, which have been accepted or adapted or adopted by almost all the states. But it really does not seem to be happening at the moment. Sorry, I went longer than 3 minutes.
For those of you that may or may not have heard the new release from the NAE, you probably got an email, most of them. I'm thinking it's a free download on PDF. It's called Building Capacity for Teaching Engineering in K12 Education. Definitely a good one for you to download. That's what it's for. David, you're
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Barnes with the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. We are the largest member organization dedicated to K12 mathematics teaching and learning. So the one question I have for you is, what should every student in K12 mathematics be studying today? So what I would argue is we should be using the mathematics we know to better understand the coronavirus. Right? I mean, that is exactly what it is. Mathematics is a tool to make sense of our world. And it may be that we don't have enough information or we need to learn more math, but if every student saw that mathematics helps us make sense of situations, and we see ourselves as being able to use mathematics to solve problems, to ask questions, to think, that's exactly what we need. We need more students that see themselves as doers of mathematics and being able to use mathematics to make a difference. That's one of the things that we as an organization look at, and we ask that question, why do math? And this is really, at the core, it's about increasing opportunities. And I think the STEM4 document says that. They talk about business and employment pieces, but the reality is mathematics across the board at K12 should always be about increasing opportunities for students. And we should do everything in our power to do that. And one of the things that we know is that, especially at high school and somewhat at elementary and middle school, we put into place activities and processes or structures that limit kids' access to mathematics. We do things like tracking students. We do things like tracking teachers. Or we take the teachers with the least experience and we give them the students with the highest need. And those are decisions as adults we make in schools, and we need to really challenge those pieces. And I think this document and our work has sort of been, we have a couple of publications called Catalyzing Change. We have one at high school and two more that are coming out, one for middle school and one for elementary, that raise these issues, and we're starting to see some places pick that up. Because we know that if, one, students don't think they can do math, that's a problem. But it's also a problem if students don't think the teachers think they can do math. And so what we need to do is get to a place where the students believe that the teachers believe that they can do mathematics to help them to do that. Now the other piece is, and I think this is about, what is rigorous and engaging? And so I'll tell you, I'm not really good at estimation, so I think I have 4 minutes, so when I get to 6, wave your hands, okay? What does mathematics mean? How do we learn mathematics? And the truth is we have a better sense of that now, and we call it rigorous and engaging mathematics. And what that means, and I would capture it as doing things like making sense of your world, but also at the core are students explaining their thinking and critiquing the reasoning of others. Are they doing the process of trying to do that sense making? Sometimes I ask groups like this, for how many of you was math your most favorite subject? Let me see a couple hands. For how many of you was mathematics your formal mathematics learning experience, your last one, a negative experience? Right? What percent of adults do you think that is? You know? So I tell you, it's 83.4% of adults. Okay? I'll also tell you that I just made that number up. But you didn't say no, right? You accepted it. That is a problem. And I will tell you that's a math problem, but that's a STEM problem as well. Because mathematics and it was quoted in this report from last year that math is a magnet. And I will say it is. It pulls kids in, and the kids that can do math can do STEM activities across the range. But it also repels. And not being able to do mathematics restricts opportunity for a number of students, and we need to collectively work on that. Thank you.
David and I have worked a lot on this paper as well as other projects, and we've done an integrated STEM education kind of activity at the STEM Leadership Alliance twice now, and Phil worked with David in the Philippines with us on a project together collaboratively. And the one thing that David and I agree on is that circle where you put a line through something when it can't happen anymore, and that's that parents telling their kids, oh, I wasn't good at math, so I don't expect you to be that kind of thing, right? We talk about that all the time. It's important. Peter, you're next.
I'm Phil Reed. I'm the president-elect for ITEEA, and I'm part of the leadership committee for the Standards for Technological and Engineering Literacy. And ITEEA has just posted the third draft of those standards on our website. So if you were not aware of that, I would encourage you to go there. Please review them. There is a survey link for you to provide detailed feedback on the standards. The project has been a couple of years in development. There's been several groups that have written and reviewed to get to this point. And I want to focus on the best, or several best practices that stick out as related to the STEM4 principle number 1, which is content. The standards for technology education were initially published in 2000. So it was definitely time for our field to look at our content. A lot has changed in education practice and obviously in technology and engineering as far as content. So a couple of big changes to note. The original standards, there were 20 with 288 benchmarks. The new standards in draft form, there are 8 core standards and 142 benchmarks. So much more streamlined. That was done in light of more recent standards development projects like Next Generation Science Standards. So if you look at the executive summary that was on your chair, you'll see that there's 8 core standards. All students need to study those. Then you'll see a second octagon that goes over the 8 practices. Those were developed by looking at best practices across education and technology and engineering education in particular. They deal with things such as the engineering habits of mind developed by the national academies. They look at 21st century skills and other key practices to formulate those 8 practices that all students should use to learn those 8 core standards. And then the outer ring of that illustration are the contexts that can be used to address the core standards and practices. The contexts are not meant to be classes. They're meant to be flexible to allow the particular national, state, or local curriculum developers to fit those in their model. In the United States, for example, a lot of states teach technology and engineering education under career and technical education. Other states do not. So the STEL standards are developed to allow the flexibility for the local model, whether it's national or more localized. Now, a couple other things I want to point out. I hope you'll go to the STEL project website, because there's a couple of tools on there that you need to become familiar with in addition to the draft standards. So there was a team that worked on providing a crosswalk to the Common Core mathematics and language arts standards, as well as the Next Generation Science Standards. So they looked at all the STEL benchmarks, and they developed a crosswalk to those other national standards. The benchmarks in Standards for Technological and Engineering Literacy are written with active verbs. So another tool on the ITEEA website has all of those verbs aligned to the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domain. And that was done also to show where we're meeting those domains by teaching those benchmarks. And it aligns to the technology and engineering context of knowing, thinking, and doing technology. So the reason we used active verbs was to make those alignments, but also to make it more efficient for curriculum developers and specifically classroom teachers to not only teach those benchmarks, but also to assess students. So we felt if you had active verbs, it made it much clearer on what should be addressed. So that clearly hits on the best practices of that STEM4.
Thank you. So Peter, you're on next.
Thank you. I'm assuming that you all can't see me.
We can. Well, we sort of can. You're on this screen right here.
Oh, great. Well, I was going to lie. I said I'm a fantastic looking guy, but I'm really pleased to be part of this. I'm really regretful that I'm not able to share the dais with some very esteemed colleagues and friends around this important paper. My role with the paper, my role now currently, I'm an executive director for an organization called K12 Education, LLC, where I and my organization work with states, districts, and schools to implement the three-dimensional science standards that you heard referred to, namely the next generation science standards. With this paper, though, I was probably best termed as the head cat herder. In other words, bringing together 4 policy organizations as well as membership organizations that are very focused on individual aspects of STEM, and to have them sit down and really become cohesive in their approach. What really is STEM, and how does it work together? And give a shout out to your leadership, Anita Deck, Jenny Blumen, who I know is no longer with ITEEA, but with Steve Barbado. Your organization was one of the key motivators for those discussions, and you should really feel very proud of the leadership. But what came out of that, more importantly, was an awareness of every organization had a better awareness of what each organization brings to the table. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with STEM. Steve talked about principle number 2. He talked about all the principles. So principle number 2, in terms of my work, when I'm working with educators and I'm working with administrators, the STEM4 paper really resonates with me all the time in the back of my mind, in that when I look at principle number 2, providing logical and authentic connections. And one of the things we do with next generation science standards is really work around phenomena and how students can explain phenomena, as well as defining and developing solutions for problems. Those are only going to be as effective as the authenticity of the problem or the phenomena is and the relevance that it has to the student's life. And what I've been finding more often than not is that some of the practices we're using in the next generation science standards, as well as the cross-cutting concepts, go across those disciplines. For instance, cross-cutting concepts are those that intersect all these domains of science. When I talk about patterns, for instance, how do patterns, if you're looking at a pattern, what would possibly cause a pattern? And though we're really looking at a science context when I'm working with educators, I ask them to say, think about your other disciplines. And this especially resounds with the elementary educators that use patterns in mathematics. You can look at patterns in literacy. You look at patterns in social studies. You certainly look at patterns in design. Same with cause and effect. Same with structure and function. All of these cross-cutting concepts that are resonant with the next generation science standards now become that opportunity that it's not just about the science as the discipline, but how does what you're learning within that discipline, how does it integrate with other subject areas? And so when I think about how this paper has influenced not just me, but others, it really started a conversation in showing how different disciplines, important content-specific disciplines, can work together to be able to provide opportunities for students to be able to make sense of their world, to be able to solve problems that are relevant to them, and hopefully as they move on, they'll be solving problems that we can't even imagine. And what I hope comes out of this conversation that you all are experiencing, and more importantly, that you will share with us, is how this is relevant in your classrooms, in your schools, in your work, and how is it that we can now, instead of putting these individual subjects in those individual silos, which is one of the principles of this paper, but more importantly, how you can show how it connects and reinforces each other to be able to move, to allow students to be able to move forward to choices and careers and in academics that they want to be able to pursue. So, thank you. I look forward to hearing the discussion.
Thank you, Peter. And Troy, we're going to have the best practice sharing. I have, do you want me to just bring them up? Can you see the screen? Yeah. So you know it's there? Just talk a little bit about each one and I'll scroll through.
So we have a few minutes here. What we did at the CSL ITEEA, we have a new award this year, STEM Schools of Excellence. And we reached out to some of those schools and we asked them if they would provide us lesson plans, essentially, that are their best practice. So we have 3 schools that sent us some lessons. And the first one comes from Hillsboro Charter Academy in Purcellville, Virginia. We had a little bit of an additional slide added in here just because I thought it was interesting and relevant. They have a program called E3, which essentially is a showcase that the students present their projects to the community. Encourages students as they learn these projects, these topics in their classes, encourages them to share what they've learned with their parents, with their peers, kind of in a TED Talk format. Something interesting that I hadn't seen before at the elementary school level. So, as far as their lesson they submitted, their best practice lesson is called Hex Bug Nanobot Ultimate Maze. And you've seen these, I've seen these previously here at conferences in the past, where you actually can go and build these as students, build the bugs, if you will. What I thought was novel about this lesson plan is that the students are asked to actually build a maze that will then, they can use then to have their bugs compete against each other, essentially. So some of the things that they require for their maze, the path of the bug has to be at least 12 inches long, must travel from start to finish without escaping and being touched. Those are some of the criteria and constraints. One novel thing that I liked was that these bugs make a very specific noise, and so they were tasked to require the bug make a noise that doesn't naturally make, and also has to travel through a tunnel. They're provided with a list of materials that then they can construct those things out of, and they're asked then in the model phase. The next phase is to create a technical drawing of their design, to carry out the plan, and to test their maze. They have 10 minutes to brainstorm their design as a group. And once the 10 minutes is up, they can, only those that have a sketch are able to actually start building. Another thing I liked about this portion of the lesson plan is they have an area where they can create their own idea for the maze and the constraints and things that would go into that. But they also have a collaborative area where they're asked to collaborate with their peers and come up with a collaborative approach to solve the maze task. And lastly, there's second to last, there's an evaluate stage where they test their design, and there's a checklist that goes along with that. They can check off to see which of their designs were successful. And then an area for a technical sketch of their final design. The last section then is an explain section where they have to go back and personally evaluate their mazes and talk about what was good about their maze design, what they could make better, and as a group respond to a couple key questions. Number one, what was one thing that you liked about your maze design? Two, an area to improve on for the next time. And then lastly, what did you see that you liked about another group's design? That was our elementary school best practice lesson. Our middle school lesson was one that's near and dear to my heart because I used to do a little bit of Arduino coding as a classroom teacher. It comes from Lang Middle School in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And it's titled Coding Organ Models with NeoPixels. And it's approached essentially as a 7th grade science unit. And what they do is they create two-dimensional diagram models of the digestive system, circulatory, respiratory, and nervous system. And what they do then is they install RGB light-emitting diodes, or NeoPixels, into these two-dimensional diagram models, and with a little bit of coding, they're then able to express their new knowledge of these systems in multiple ways. So there's a picture on the second page, which I think highlights this pretty well. Picture of the heart. And then they give them a sort of pre-canned, 7th graders, they give them a pre-canned illustration on the following pages about how they can program these. And they're using a program, Arduino IDE, with a STEM4 Arduino installed. So they walk them through how to do that.
And just to let you know, on the conference app for this session, these lessons are all going to be attached, so you can download them. Okay, and the last lesson submitted was actually one that was a publication a few years back, published in the TET, Technology and Engineering Teacher. And it comes from Unionville High School in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. And it's Bringing Engineering to Life, Pergola Design. So this was a real-world example of a teacher trying to get their students involved in actual school activities. So there's a middle school, and the Family Consumer Science Department at the middle school in their district had built a garden that was intended to illustrate to students organic gardening, essentially. But the teachers there thought that the garden was underutilized. They wanted to actually be able to bring classes into the garden and have them stay there as an outdoor classroom space for the class period. At the time, they didn't have the space or the seating, etc., that would work for that. So they went to Unionville High School, to one of the teachers there, probably going to mispronounce his last name, Mike Berkeyheiser. He was the teacher, and he tasked a student there, actually, Abby Durrell, a former student now, who's studying architecture, tasked her to explore some different design ideas. So they went through the engineering design process and looked at some of the criteria and constraints that were required. They looked at different design ideas. They looked at building a shed type structure. They looked at just putting benches in the garden itself. Finally, they arrived back at a pergola design, and they had to
go through all of the criteria and constraints that would make this a design that would be long-lasting, that would withstand the weather, and would meet the needs for the middle school. The final solution that they designed and then tested through AutoCAD Inventor, and they also built a three-dimensional model of it. They go through testing and analysis essentially to look at the pressures and things, apply FEA analysis on the pergola itself to analyze whether or not it would withstand the task that it was required to withstand. And then they tasked the construction students there at the high school to build the project. It ended up being a 18-foot by 14-foot pergola with a finished height of 10 foot 10 inches using 6x6 posts. And there's a picture of it on the last page. And Abby included some, drawing a blank here, but some fencing around the edge there for some semi-privacy for classes, while still having it nice and open, so it didn't distract from the rest of the garden. Those are the lessons, best practice lessons.
Thank you. So we had the elementary, middle, and high school best practice examples from our STEM schools of excellence. We've had the comments and the connections from our panelists. Before we go any further, I wanted to mention that Cindy Hasselbring and Joni Funderburg both couldn't be here because of the travel restrictions. Joni, I forgot to mention earlier, is from Texas Instruments, but she has a long history in education and policy making and so forth. She's based out of Denver, Colorado, and has a mathematics background, has been in a think tank out there for some years running an organization. And now she is the National Policy Advisor in the Education Division of Texas Instruments. So we started late because I was in here late, and I apologize for that. So I've asked for us to be able to run late here and also for the reception to run late. So at least you won't be chipped on that part of it. What I'd like to do right now is we have about 15 minutes left. I'd like to be able to take some questions from the audience, so maybe 8 to 10 minutes worth. And when you ask those questions, it can either be on these lessons, and Troy and I and Phil and others can comment, or you can ask it directly to one of the panelists. Peter's online, and we have the panelists up front here. You heard their backgrounds earlier. So do we have any questions from the audience and or comments on best practice for STEM? Yes.
So in order to address these principles and get them into the teacher's hands, right? So the resources that we choose that we provide to the teachers are sort of the pathway for them to be able to address these principles with their students. What are your suggestions when vetting or choosing curricula or other resources in order to promote the principles for the teachers? Is there a framework you recommend?
Can you just give the final question?
So I guess what I'm asking is, when thinking about resources to provide to the teachers in districts and schools, is there a framework or some sort of vetting process that you suggest to use in order to address the principles with these resources?
So I'll take a stab. When I talk to my colleagues in math and I talk about STEM, some of them say, we think there's a silent M. And when you go on and say, look at someone they're doing a STEM lesson, a common question I will ask is, can you talk to me about the mathematics you're doing in this lesson? And the response I get is, after a long silence, well, we did some counting, or we did some measuring, or we did a histogram or a box plot or a dot plot. A box plot would be a plus. And so, to your question, I think that we have to ask if we're actually going to do STEM. And I understand that in the document, it talks about connections between. So you don't have to do mathematics in every lesson, but if you never do mathematics, that's a problem. And when I say do mathematics, that would be having students think about the mathematical practices. Are they sense-making? Are they communicating? Are they critiquing the reasoning of others? And are they doing content or applying content that is close to their grade level, right? And using those things. Because at the core, for me, it's about increasing opportunities. And that's, we see some things that I will put in the classification of shiny objects. It's a fun activity, but it doesn't help kids actually increase their opportunities. And sometimes it really only looks good for the adults in the room. We did this and it's cool and we get a picture. But how do we build in ways that kids are actually doing really real problems? And so that would be a sort of a first level. The other part is about collaboration, and I think that's one of the strengths of what Steve and his whole team does, is building this collaboration. How do we get the people in mathematics talking with the people in science, talking with the people in technology, talking with the people in engineering, to say, we're doing this, how do we learn and apply this together? It's not working harder, it's working smarter.
Thank you.
I'm loud. I'm really loud. I do TSA together. My question is, I am a big proponent of STEM units and doing STEM projects across the board. My problem comes, and maybe we're the only state, Florida's a little interesting, where everybody has set curriculum. You have to be on this page on this day, and that has to be on this page on this day. How do you integrate all of that? Pages where they don't match to do this. That seems to be, to me, the issue, is that people don't want to integrate, but people aren't given the opportunity to flex enough to integrate.
Well, I was going to say, you answered your own question when you said I do TSA.
Good reply.
You know, as technology and engineering educators, we use authentic learning. So engaging your students in those activities, you're going to pull in the technology, the engineering, the mathematics.
But that's me in my isolated class. Why? How do we get all the teachers to, across the board, pull in stuff when everybody's on a different page? The kids seem to buy in better when the math teacher and the science teacher, and when everybody's doing a project together and they're doing a part. Oh, well, in math class, look, it does connect. Whereas when I connected in my club or in my engineering class, they're just like, yeah, okay, well, Elizabeth's on training, she does that anyway.
Yeah, Steve, if I can jump in on that question, I think it's an excellent one. Dave touched on it, and Phil, I believe, really expounded on it in terms of specific to the one particular aspect. But what you're describing is really a great opportunity to use this paper to talk with leadership within your school. You're not going to have a cohesive project unless there are opportunities for teachers to sit down and collaborate and to be able to kind of break down the barriers of that set curriculum. I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of how everyone wants to be able to make that time, but they all have different pathways that are going in different directions, very often not crossing over. So I would encourage that this STEM paper would be a great paper to share with your administration, within your school, say this is a opportunity that we can come together and just try one project, just one collaborative project. Let's see what we can do. And I would be willing to guarantee that as a result of that, the change that came out of it and the opportunity to converse with each other, I think that's going to be the harbinger for better things to come. Thank you.
Can I make a comment that'll combine some of this? And I'd like to connect it to Greg. Was it 2014 that the integration in K12 education publication came out from the NAE? And there were specific recommendations that were identified in this STEM4 policy paper that we used as a team. And then what happened was we started to realize what Peter was just saying, and what you were just talking about, to break and move from those individual silos into that integrated component takes a little bit of a shift in thinking. And the tests of engineering aptitudes, mathematics, and science teams from TSA, we used a national contest activity to combine, there's Christine Royce, NSTA, with NCTM and ASE, American Society for Engineering Educators, and us, and we took the thermal battery building of the house structure and trying to be able to hold as much heat in with a heat lamp up on top of it for 1 minute. Long story short, you move the heat lamp away, you use a laser gun, you read the temperature on it, you wait 30 seconds, read the temperature, wait 30 seconds, and the idea was who could build the structure that would have the highest temperature, and then the ratio of who could create the best efficiency rating of that over time. It was a great activity. So we took this to the STEM Leadership Alliance as a group. Our organizations worked together. It was kludgy, wasn't it? It was hard because we had to all sort of give and take a little bit on this. And that's what it takes, I think, out in the schools, a little bit of a shift of thinking with the allowance to do that. But that K12 integration book is still a great one. And, it was a great impetus as we move forward. About Cameron in the back, you've had your hand up for a while. But I think I'm not going any further.
Thank you. Cameron Dissing, NC State. So, first of all, thank the panel and all the work that everybody's done. So I recently was a reviewer for an NSF panel. I won't talk about the solicitation. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was anytime there was these best practices that we wanted to implement, a new curriculum, where there was that, one of the most important things, which we kind of talked around, is professional development, right? So we do some, I've conducted some with EBD. I did it so well everybody wanted their money back, so let's get that going for me. And not only professional development, but also scaffolding these processes, and that was very important reading this. So what is some of the discourse around doing that, right? So anytime we're looking at best practices, our new curriculum, or this kind of integrated approach that we want to take, what are some of these conversations around that?
You jump in. All right. So, even though I work for a member organization of individual teachers, I think the unit of change is not the teacher. I think it has to be bigger than the teacher. That we need to think across grades, and it's really an equity issue. Students shouldn't be thrown into the teacher lottery, right? If I get you, I have a great math and science and technology experience and a STEM experience, but if you get me, I just get worksheets. And that's not fair. And so I really think from an organizational side, and this is really about structures and how we think about this, that we need to do more. And it's really about collaboration, that our teachers, all our third grade teachers are talking and thinking about and looking at the lessons that they're doing. And it's not that you can't try something, but we need to know, if it's really working, everybody should be doing it. And if it's not working as well, then you should be doing something different. And that we need that leadership in terms of these activities. This is incredibly important in STEM, and incredibly important in math and science, technology and engineering, because it shouldn't be, it is an equity issue. That's clear, and it shouldn't be. And so that's, to me, it's a school leadership issue, and a district leadership issue, and a state leadership issue. It's too much to put it on the shoulders of teachers, that we actually need leadership to say, we're going to do this.
How do you make that?
You call Dave.
So Norman Schwarzkopf in, I believe it was 1992, Desert Storm. Surround, infiltrate, and bombard. That's probably the best thing I think we can do as educators, tap from every angle. Yes?
I was
either fortunate or unfortunate, whichever way you want to look at it, to be on my state's advisory commission to rewrite standards this year. Most of my career was middle school, and I had the advantage of being able to kind of do my own thing. I'm now at a technical school, which means that everything is sort of like yours, yours, yours. Do you often find a way to work with state level DOEs so that when they're looking at standards to be rewritten, that they look at how do we incorporate these things? Because I'm seeing this disconnection, working on, that's why I said fortunate or unfortunate, working with this committee, it was, you're working on this piece, you're working on that piece. And when I brought up the question of how do we integrate this together, they're like, oh, don't worry, it'll be together.
Well, quick comment on that. Tom Loveland is here, and he is the principal investigator for the Standards for Technological and Engineering Literacy project for the revision of the national standards. And the state supervisor of Maryland, Scott Nichols, I think is at a meeting right now, but Scott, from this project, worked with his director, and the state of Maryland next month at their board meeting is going to be adopting those standards as that technology and engineering experience at the school district level. So Tom works at the for University of Maryland Eastern Shore. His office is here in Baltimore, and he's worked closely with Scott to help them do that. And it takes that kind of collaboration. But this STEM4 paper, the NAE publications, that new one that just came out, and this one, all lead in that direction. I can't rip any off on the top of my head, David, but I know on your website you've got some great resources for teachers, right?
Right, so we have Catalyzing Change that talks about restructuring mathematics education and actually doing a common pathway for all students. And we actually see states that are starting to rethink their standards and organize their high school mathematics content where it's a common pathway for students. Then they get to junior or senior year and it diverges and so, and also our Principles to Actions, which is about teaching practices, and those are something cool.
So what I'm trying to say is all of us have these resources that you can use in support of showing it to your administration, to the community, to your powers to be that make those changes, and at the State Department. And sometimes it goes bottom up, sometimes it comes top down, but it has to happen from a variety of routes, in my opinion. I think at this point we're going to introduce Troy again. He's got a little talk to give you about the Council for Supervision and Leadership, and then I'm going to finish up with a comment.
So I get the best announcement of the night, which is the next session is food and drink. The CSL would like to invite all of you to come just outside the doors here for some food and drink, kindly sponsored by Texas Instruments for the CSL President's Reception. And part of the CSL, our mission is to recruit supervisors and leaders. And we know you're all leaders because you're here tonight. So we would invite you to come and talk to one of our board members. They'll have the green CSL ribbon on the bottom of their lanyard. And you come and talk to one of the CSL board members. We'll have some coupons, not for tonight's reception. This is already sponsored and free to you. But for tomorrow night's opening reception, Steve's got an example there. We have some additional drink coupons for the opening reception for the conference tomorrow night. So come and talk to us about getting involved and being part of the masses that we need to inspire change.
So I want to say thank you, Troy, and also a big thank you to Texas Instruments. They're not allowed to travel right now as a company, but their conference was happening on the TQ conference the exact same days as this one. But Joni was flying up here